Sir Keir Starmer has paid back more than £6,000 worth of gifts and hospitality that he's received since becoming Prime Minister, following a backlash over those gifts and donations.
Well, it comes as Labour donor Lord Ali is being investigated by Parliament Standards Watchdog for allegedly failing to register interest. And we're joined from Toulouse by Business and Energy Minister Sarah Jones, who's got lots of important things to talk about that our listeners want to hear about. But on the front pages of the newspapers is still this issue, with Lord Ali now being investigated, Sir Keir Starmer paying back some of the money, some £6,000. And isn't that the point, that it's still there, it's still not cleared up, and it's preventing everybody from doing their jobs?
So, look, the big driving force of Keir Starmer's speech at Labour Party conference and that drives his values in politics is that he wants people to have trust in politics and in politicians. And he wants to rebuild that relationship with our politics, because we think politics can be a force for good. We're incredibly impatient to improve this country and grow the economy and do all the things that this country wants to see and that we were elected to do. So building trust is really important.
The problem is, as you're saying this, I'm thinking, then, why is there such a muck-up so early on? Why £6,000, not all of it? What's the clarity on the rules? What's the clarity on why all of this has happened? Is it just a mess, or is there some real problem underneath?
So I think the question in the past has always been transparency. All of the scandals of the previous government were all about transparency, people being paid things and not being clear where the money was coming from and what it was for. The question now is, what is the basic sort of principles around hospitality, which is something that politicians, business people, journalists, everybody gets in many different ways, and most politicians will turn down far, far, far more than they ever get offered. But there is a question.
What the principles
here.
are?
What is the principle? Well, that is what. So the principles around hospitality are being reviewed by the Prime Minister. He has asked for this review, and it's going to be published shortly.
So the money he's paid back is before he knows what the principles are?
In advance of these principles coming out, he has made a decision to pay back some of the money from his register of interests that he had since he was Prime Minister. There are some principles.
Have you received any gifts since the election?
So there is just a difference, I think, between government and opposition. I've had three gifts, events since I was an MP in 7 years, you know, very boring. But I mean, that's
but not since the election.
I have been to the proms since the election. And
did you receive a free ticket?
I did.
And are you going to pay back the money?
I am investigating whether that is possible, because it wasn't a ticket that was sort of for sale, as it were. I was a guest of the BBC. But yes, I think the principle is that we need to look at what these gifts and hospitality is for. I think the question that the public are asking is for what purpose are you going to these events, and are they helping you do your job? And that's what the new principles will look at. But there is no question, and I should say this, there is no question of anybody having broken any rules here or anybody
but
being
you're saying
given...
that going to the proms didn't help you do your job?
Well, there's an argument there, isn't it? If you look at it from a lens of I've been to 3 things in 7 years, doesn't seem like much. You look at it from the lens of, did it help you do your job? Maybe that's where the principles...
Kate was just asking about the confusion here, and the confusion is the Prime Minister has paid some money back. We don't know why. It's reported that other ministers don't need to pay it back. But if you were David Lammy or Angela Rayner, who have received and declared these gifts, if there's one rule for the Prime Minister, surely that rule has to apply to them as well. Isn't the logical thing, if he's applying new rules, which he's not told us about yet, you've got to have the same rules for everybody in the Cabinet. So if you're David Lammy or Angela Rayner, you've got to pay it back, haven't you?
Well, he said he's going to look at the principles about hospitality. In advance of that, he's paying back some money. We are clear that nobody else is being asked to do that, because nobody has.
But you've just told us. But you've just told us you are. But you've just told us you are going to pay back your prom ticket. So if you're going to pay back your prom ticket and the Prime Minister's paying back his Taylor Swift ticket, surely David Lammy's got to pay his back as well.
I think it's for people to look at this individually. The principle is, how do we make sure we, as a new government, build trust in politics? That's why we're looking at the principles around hospitality. It's why the Prime Minister has decided to do that. And we will make sure that those principles are really clear. And in advance of that, he's made a decision as an individual, as the Prime Minister. And that's where we are. And I think that will be a good thing to have that clarity around hospitality and the purposes of it. Of course, it is often perfectly reasonable if things are in your own constituency, if things are building relationships with business, if things are building relationships with organisations that help you do your job. These things are not uncommon, but having a look and a refresh as part of the ministerial code, I think is the right thing to do. Look,
it may be uncommon and it may be perfectly reasonable, but it's obviously a mess, isn't it?
I think that's the concern. Now, you know, are having to talk about that because it's what people are talking about. Well, you know, guests have been saying on the show this morning, I can't believe it. I was watching a kid's football match and the parents are talking about it. They never talk about politics. And that's the problem for you, isn't it? You want to talk about investment in energy, involving also green energy. But will that mean cheaper bills? Because that's what people really care about. And are you going to be able to deliver all of this when this mess is unfolding?
So we're completely laser focused on growing the economy and becoming a green superpower, because that's where the jobs of the future are. Our argument on energy is really clear. Homegrown energy is cheaper, as well as greener, better for the economy. It's cheaper, and also it helps with our energy security. We know the cost of living crisis was caused by our reliance on the oil and gas prices globally. We know that that's what drove the insecurity that we had over that phase. And so we also know that if we have our own homegrown energy, it's cheaper and it's more secure and it delivers more jobs. And what we have discovered over the last few years is that we could have had 10,000 more jobs in energy if the Conservatives had unlocked some of the infrastructure. But they've kept this chokehold on our infrastructure for such a long time that we haven't had the jobs and growth that we want to see. And that's why we're turbocharging with Great British Energy, with the National Wealth Fund.
Can I just ask
and with all the... Yeah.
Can I just ask you a quick question about growth? We know that public investment is good for growth. We know the current plans have falling public investment in the next few years. The Guardian reports that the Treasury has asked every government department, which includes your department, to come up with 10% cuts in their capital spending, in their public investment for the spending review. So while you're talking about green energy plans, your department has got to find 10% cuts. How is 10% cuts in every government department's capital spending, their investment for the future, how's that going to help growth? Isn't that going to cut growth?
Well, I think there's a few things to say here. First, the budget will announce what the government is doing, and I don't know, and we can't preempt that, but I know it will be a budget for growth. The second thing is we have to be reasonable about the inheritance that we have, and we know that there is a massive black hole in the spending over and above what we thought there was in the first place. But the third point is we have a different approach to growth from the previous government. It is ideologically different, and we are learning from other countries around the world who are doing similar things, which is where you
asked to find 10% cuts in your capital spending.
Look, we're obviously having to be reasonable in terms of how we spend money, but
10% cuts in capital spending is a big cut.
If you look at the funding for Great British Energy, £8 billion. If you look at the National Wealth Fund, £7 billion. This is a huge investment of public capital in order to crowd in private sector money. If you look at Europe, if you look at America, you look at other countries, giving incentives to the private sector to come and invest billions into our country is the way to grow the economy. It is having a plan, having the economic stability, having an industrial strategy that everybody can understand, and saying to the investors around the world, which we will say at the massive investment summit that we're having in a couple of weeks, that we'll say with all the relationships we're building. I'm here in France today to do just that. Come to the UK. It's a stable place with great people. You can grow the green jobs of the future. You can invest in our country, and we will, where required, put some public sector money in as well, but we'll want some return for that, but we'll put some public sector money in to crowd in that investment and incentivize that investment. That is how you grow the economy. It's through private sector investment that's teed up by the public sector. It's a completely different approach to the previous government, and it will grow the economy.
We'll leave it there. Thank you very much indeed. Good to talk to you this morning.